One set of tricks that took me a particularly long time to figure out were rail flip tricks. So today that's what I want to talk about. The two main things that really helped me understand and execute rail flips way better. And the first tip is to really start to understand the path that your board follows. So since we all have slightly different shaped boards, the path might be a little bit different for everyone, but in general, your board does rotate, and depending on the kind of rail flip you do, this might be more or less important. So if you're doing something like a rail to rail or a single rail flip, then understanding how the board travels along the nose really helps when trying to land this trick. Because the real secret here is that after you understand how the board moves, what you can do is kind of adjust your shoulders in advance of the trick that you're going to do. Well, let's just start with a rail to rail. If I want to do rail to rail, I know the board is going to travel forward a little bit. It's going to rotate about 15 to 30 degrees. It depends on the path that you follow, and it also depends how you do the rail flip. If you just push straight forward and do one of those like bouncy rail flips, then you need to be jumping forward more than what I need to do. I do rail flips by pulling the board up onto the nose and rotating it along that axis. So what I need to do is adjust my shoulders right before I do the trick. Instead of being parallel with the board, I'm going to bring my shoulder forward just a little bit because I want to land over here. So I'm going to pull my shoulders forward. See how many tries it takes me. Just a little bit, move my shoulder forward just a little bit, and there. My shoulders were where it needs to be. My shoulders basically are moving to the place I think the board is going to rotate to. There we go. But I was a little bit too far forward, so I need to pull back a little bit. Still a little bit too far forward. And it goes the same way back. If I do a rail flip, try to go back to rail to rail backwards from here, and I keep my shoulders kind of either parallel or where I'm going before, the board is going to rotate behind my foot. So we'll go forward. If I want to go back, I should really open up my shoulders because the board is going to rotate this way. Does that make sense? Even though I'm not landing any of them, I'll throw some good examples in there. And it works for rail flips. If I'm going to do a full rail flip, I know the board is going to land over here. So I move my shoulders forward first, and then my shoulders are exactly where they need to be when I'm going to land the board, when I'm going to land on the board. I realized this mostly when doing the rail to rail, because what would happen is if I keep my shoulders where they are, just completely parallel to the board, this happens. I land exactly where I started and the board travels without me. So once I realized that I could kind of lead the way with my shoulders, rail tricks became way easier, especially to land them. And that's mostly for straight rail flips and different kinds of rail flips. I mean, if you're going to do like rail to Casper, then you also might want to just favor moving your shoulders a little bit so that you are where the board rolls to. If you keep your shoulders here, you might not quite make it over here. You might be off balance. That's really one of my favorite tips when it comes to trying to learn how to rail flip, especially single rail flips or just doing a single rail to rail variation. Lead with the shoulders, think about where the board's going to travel to, and your body will be where it needs to land back on the board. It doesn't work quite as well for rotating varial flips. It can if you have a consistent rotation on those, but it's a little bit difficult. So when I'm doing rotating flips, I'm kind of thinking about where the board typically lands and then trying to stay nice and up over the board. Because in the same vein, if I'm leaning too far forward this way, if I'm leaning my shoulders over my toes, I'm gonna struggle to flip and land on the board, I find, because the board's not going forward when I do this trick. So I try to stay a little more upright. So the same thing goes for that as well. If you are landing in front of the board, you probably need to lean back a little bit. And if you're landing behind the board, you probably need to lean forward a little bit. The other thing that really helped me a lot was re-understanding that this is a pressure flip and not like a jump and flick. It's not really a jump, pop, and flick the way we think of ollies or ollie kickflips where you're jumping up and popping off the ground, then you're flicking the board. It doesn't really work that way. And in the beginning, I didn't realize that, but it's a pressure flip. The more pressure you put into this board, pushing down into the ground, once it tips over, the pressure you had here becomes the power for that flip. So I used to think of it as kind of jumping up off the board and like smacking it, like trying to jump, and as I come up off the board, pushing and kicking back to get that flip, or jumping up and trying to like roll it forward as I did that. But now I really understand they're pressure flips. I want to put pressure into the board and push down into the ground, and then when it slips out from underneath my foot, that pressure is what becomes the power to flip the board. It really took me a long time to kind of come to this realization, but now that I have, it has by far improved my flips, all of them. I think a lot of the beginner flips you can get away with that kind of like jump and roll, but once you start getting into like varial double flips, or technically like what are the 1 3/4 flips or 1 1/4 flips, those really need the power from the pressure part of the trick. So once I started to understand that, it really unlocked that variation for me. Oh, I keep tic-tacking on that today. Darn it. I think I can get one clean one. Oh. And it's funny because as I got better at this, I really started to be able to feel it. Like it took me a long time to get to this point, but over time as you do this trick, and as you do these kinds of tricks, you start to feel like the tension, and you start to feel that almost snap back when you get a really good pressure flip on your rail flip. I'm gonna blame the fact that I mostly do this on the spoon nose. And that's also very true. I I find this trick to be way easier on a single kick than a double kick. I mean, they were designed for it, so. But as with a lot of freestyle tricks, I mean, everyone does them a little bit differently. Sometimes we find little nuances or ways of framing the trick to help make them more understandable to us. So I often find that once I find the correct framing of the trick, like rail flip is a pressure flip, then I start to do the trick better myself. And the frame really, really helps me. But it's a little bit different for everyone. Some people have different framings, different understandings, different techniques, and it really helps to kind of play around with how people do it and see which one works best for you. But of course, I hope that something in this video is helpful to you, and I hope you're having a great day.